All right, good morning. Welcome to Black Hat. We're here in Mandalay Bay CD for session 2 of our mini summit on bug bounty programs. I'm going to bring Kim up on stage in just a moment to introduce this next session, but just some housekeeping notes and reminders that the business hall is located on this level and to take some time to go over and visit that. The Black Hat Arsenal is also in the business hall. And finally, a reminder to please put your phone on silent or vibrate. We don't need to hear your ringtone during the talk. Thank you very much and welcome Kim to the stage.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for the second session of the Bug Bounty Micro Summit this morning. We have 3 sessions in the summit, and if you were here for the first, you saw Adam Rudderman talking about the basics, the nuts to bolts of bug bounties, and sort of, hey, I'm thinking about doing one of these. Now we're in for some discussion from experienced bounty managers, moderated by Jarek, Stanley, who runs Microsoft's bounty programs. After this, we have 1/3 talk coming up, and all of our speakers today, all of the panelists, have worked together to build a cohesive content plan for you this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to Jarek and let them go with the panel, and we look forward to seeing you at the end for Q&A. Thanks.
Let's see if we got a slide up here. Not yet. All right. Good morning, all. Jarek Stanley from Microsoft. Quick question before we get started. Who here in the audience is already running or involved in a bounty program? Okay, quite a few. That's great to hear. So the panel is here to talk about bounty operations with a focus in the first 6 to 12 months, lessons learned, their experience running, building, changing, developing a bounty program that's already off the ground. So who are we? So we've got Shannon Sabens, Greg Caswell, and Josh J. I'll give these guys a chance to introduce themselves. Why don't you get started?
Sure thing. My name is Greg Caswell. I'm a manager of application security at Indeed.com. I've been running our bug bounty program for about 5.5 years. Prior to that, I was doing dev work, so it gives me a good perspective of some of the pain points after we've tossed the bugs over the wall, so to speak.
I'm Josh J. My previous role, I worked for United Airlines. I built out and managed the bug bounty program for United, and now I'm currently at a film studio working on bug bounty and AppSec.
I'm Shannon Sabens, and I've been managing security programs for about 20 years, and I have been at Trend Micro with the Zero Day Initiative Bug Bounty for the last 6 years.
Great. So we have a wide range of experience from a couple different industry areas and a few folks that have run multiple bounty programs in different organizations. So let's jump right in. First question we've got is how you articulate, how you explain your bounty program, the value of your bounty program to your internal stakeholders. I know Adam covered a lot of the stakeholders you'll be talking to, your legal department, your engineering and developers, your executives, your leadership. But from your organization's perspective, how do you handle that conversation? Kind of quickly, I'll give each of 3 of you a chance to answer that question. Give me a little elevator pitch.
Sure. I'll kick it off. Almost the catalyst for our program was that we would get researchers that would send us emails or communicate through us through other channels saying that, hey, we found a bug, this is super serious. If you give us some money, we'll tell you what it is. And it never felt good. And so that kind of kicked off the desire to have an explicit bug bounty program so that we could ingest the findings, safely find out what it is they have or haven't found, and work with them to get it fixed. And so at least for us, that was one of the big pieces of value for us early on, was just to get out of that weird communication cycle where both sides didn't really trust each other.
And someone says, you're a year in, what's going on? I think, why are we even doing this? Is that still the same answer?
Oh, there's a lot of other benefits we've picked up since then. It definitely fixed that problem. So we've not seen it in the past 5.5 years, because anytime someone tries to contact us outside of the normal communication channels, we can just point them back to our bounty program and say, please submit through here. Once you have, let us know what ticket it was so we can start working it. But it keeps the conversation in a good location.
Just getting them on the same page. Developers and engineers are the stakeholders that I work with very closely, but then there are also the people that I need to have on board. I mean, you can have your CISO, your CEO, CTO, whatever, be totally on board, but if it's not the engineering group or the developers that are actually doing the work, then it's going to fall apart right there. And I first start out being very blunt and clear. There's going to be issues, and it's not going to be an easy road. But what's great is secure code is most likely going to be also stable code. So if we can get proactive and we keep working and just develop and go through the process, get things fixed, it ends up being a lot less work for them in the long run and stabilizes their role, in theory.
At Trend Micro, we're a little bit different at the ZDI because we are a vendor agnostic bug bounty program. And because we do share our intelligence gratis with the vendor and partner with them to find remediation, but we also feed that intelligence back into our own tipping point product and back into Trend generally to protect our customers in advance of vendor patches. So for us, that's the differentiator, that's the value add. That said, it is a very expensive program, and we do want to provide leadership in terms of white hat research, and we are very eager to partner with others to help them with their bug bounty. It's not something that we see, as competition, but something that we want to be a part of and help vendors or others where we can. But for us, that's the value proposition.
Thank you. And for our next question, again, Adam talked about how to set up all the options for designing a bounty program. Chloe, after this, has a great talk on long-term, how to keep researchers and your own teams engaged and fresh and continue to produce value. But after the first 6 to 12 months, what was one of the hardest or most unexpected lessons that you learned? Something you wish the audience, if they're just getting started, knows now instead of learns this down the road?
I can start that off. It kind of ties into a little bit of the previous question as well. One of the pain points we experienced early on was we got more submissions than we were expecting at a certain point. And some of that was how we set up our bounty. We started it fairly quiet, and then oh man, this is great. It's not a lot of volume. And we cranked up the payout a good chunk, and then got a significant spike in submissions, which is great. But then you've got to deal with them. You've got to work with all the engineering teams, you've got to work with the researchers, and that takes time. The reason why it relates to the previous question a little bit is one of the reasons we got flooded early on is we found applications that we didn't even necessarily know about on the security team that it's these are things that our engineers are developing and pushing out there. And they have some bugs that need to be fixed. But it's a mixed bag there. We were very happy to find out that some of our processes were broken, and the bounty program helped us identify where we could fix those processes and those broken communication channels. At the same time, we had to deal with that influx of submissions, and it was just short-term pain, but for long-term health.
For myself, I think grossly misunderstanding what the volume and scope would be. We were pretty confident based off of what we got from a pseudo responsible disclosure channel that it would roughly echo that. So we planned accordingly, scoped accordingly, and boy, were we wrong. So we were just inundated just between researchers submitting questions, let alone actual submissions. There's also the media inquiry. So it just went from something that we felt was going to be a slow rollout, something quiet. It's the internet, so it goes viral pretty darn quickly. And managing and maintaining those expectations just from that flood was difficult and something we should have expected, but definitely did not.
Because we're a vendor agnostic program, we have the luxury of kind of scraping off what we're not interested in and saying thank you very much. But as the vendor, and I talked to a lot of our partners about their programs. As the vendor, you don't have that same luxury. You really have to look at and triage everything. So in terms of volume, you're drinking from the fire hose. You're going to have a higher false positive rate that you're going to have to weed out. Coming though from a research, because we're also a research team, coming from a research team perspective, making clear in the public space what your scope is for the program is really going to help you kind of weed some of that out. And so making clear, what's in scope, what targets are what products, product targets coming from the research space are most valuable to you. Maybe you have a lot of third-party code, but you want to see vulnerabilities in your own code, but making clear to that research audience what your priorities are and what's in scope and what's most valuable to you is incredibly important. And even, we had talked about pricing. I would say for us, we have kind of a matrix. These are product targets that are most valuable to us. Do we have a well-documented report? Do we have a remote code execute? What do we have here? And then having kind of a hierarchy of what's most valuable. And that can be associated with your awards. You may or may not wish to make your awards payment public, but helping the audience, that research audience, understand what's most important and what's most valuable to you will help you get more of what you want and hopefully less of what you don't want. And even with regard to initial triage, I'm not the most technical person on the team, but I can go through that initial triage and say, is it a product target we're very interested in? Is it well documented? Is it, do we have a proof of concept? All the things, right? I can do that. Everything doesn't have to go on to the vetting team. Take the time to get everything you need and make sure you have a well-documented report before you send that on to more expensive resources. I would also say that payments are a huge challenge, and Red went into that a little bit, and I will tell you, paying fast is a big deal. Payments is incredibly challenging. For some of the reasons you mentioned, if you're an American organization, or whatever your country is, you have certain restrictions, sanctions, what have you. You want to make sure that you understand those well, how you're going to pay. If you're paying finders as contractors, what currencies are you going to pay in? And so a lot of times the finders, especially if they're coming from, if you're in two different countries, the expectations about how you might be able to pay versus how you're actually able to pay, the expectations can be very mismatched. You're a legitimate corporation and you have these restrictions, and finders, especially very young finders, they don't always understand what that means and what that looks like. And you're anonymous to the vendor, maybe coming through ZDI program, but you're not anonymous to me. And you may be credited, if you're the vendor, you may be credited anonymously online, but to pay them, you do know who they are. So those are some challenges that I think you'll face right out of the gate that you need to put a lot of thought into.
Yeah. Speaking about the payments, which is certainly a challenge we've been dealing with on the Microsoft side as well, and making some progress there. How did you guys deal with that in your organizations from the vendor side? Did you outsource this? Did you just in-house? What was the
So, at least for Indeed, we use a third-party vendor for initial triage and payout handling, and I am very happy we have. I can't even imagine the difficulty it would be to try to handle all the payments yourself in a global company with all the places that the submissions come in from. So being able to not have to do that part of the bounty program saves us a ton of time. As far as the payouts themselves, like scale and stuff, at least from our perspective, that's the kind of the primary lever we use to control volume. If our volume's too low, then and we want more submissions, then offering more bounty payout obviously will attract a larger crowd to your program.
So for us at United, our goal or idea, what we wanted to do is actually build the program around miles in general. That was a core concept that we thought was just neat, something that we already had a mechanism for in the first place. People travel, they already get miles. There's a whole process flow that United already had embedded there. So we're like, awesome, let's just leverage that. And so that's what we did. We did bite off a little bit more than we could chew. We thought, 1 million miles would be a great incentive, and we were definitely right. It was a huge incentive. It was really cool, and we loved it, and it made us very unique. And proud of that, but yeah, he was mentioning the kind of the gating or the limiting for what the researchers are going for and going after. We kind of had that mentality of go big or go home, and we definitely wanted to go home, but we had to stick around, and ended up being really cool. It was a fun, unique way to do it, and so it was interesting.
So a part of your goal is to get, as the vendor, maybe you want to see your vulnerability reports before somebody else or another program does. That's why you're looking at doing this yourselves, right? So paying fast is a big differentiator between you and somebody else. We do all our own payments in-house. And so I've been at CDI 6 years. We've done 5,500 vulnerabilities end-to-end with vendors over the years. I have done 4,000 of those working with vendors. It means I've done 4,000 payments. So I've made 4,000 payments. Would I do this myself again? It works very well, and it's great because you have a lot of control over it, and you can pay fast, but it is a lot of overhead. And would I choose to do that again, or would I choose to do that as a vendor? I might not. I might look at outsourcing that, to be very honest with you. Once you have it set up and it's going well, you have more control over how fast you pay, but it is a lot of overhead.
If you're doing cash, seriously consider outsourcing. If it's something unique like miles, it can work out just fine. But yeah, otherwise cash is king, and it makes it a lot easier with a vendor.
Yeah, those are good things to know before getting too far down the road. So speaking of researchers, the core of this business, and additionally your own security teams, these guys are critical. These people across the globe, no matter where they're coming from, are a critical piece of any bounty program. Can you share some best practices for working with the research community at large, or examples of times when things have gone great or bad, and what you've learned from that? Josh, why don't you start out?
Okay, cool. So Rudd mentioned these, but transparency is integral. The more transparent you are, don't air your dirty laundry and say, hey, Steve and Susan are really lazy right now, but Mark is usually really good. They don't need that level. But that transparency and constant communication, templates is cheating as that may sound, just a simple template. Hey, we really appreciate you. We're going to get back to you in X amount of time, or this is currently where it is in the process. Thank you for your patience. Again, thanking them for their patience goes a long way. If everyone is on the same page, like, hey, this isn't easy. Just because you found a vulnerability in an hour doesn't mean it takes an hour to fix. It could take a month. It could take like a complete re-architecture, new code base, something. So it's not always easy, but if you communicate to them with that, they'll be fine. most cases. It gets a little dicey when it gets to the point of like maybe a duplicate, especially early on in the programs where they're like, well, you just launched, how do I have a duplicate? Well, the multiple people submit the same thing or something very similar. So managing those expectations and being very clear and upfront. We've definitely had people who told us that's impossible. There's no way that's a duplicate. Your program started at this time and I hate you. Oh, awesome. Thank
Do you
you.
award duplicates?
Through our programs, no, we do not.
That's something you have to think about. You will see duplicate reports. Do you award duplicates? So that needs to be what's in scope.
Yeah, at least for our program, the way we kind of balance the duplicates, other than trying to minimize them as much as possible by fixing them quickly, is the program, the third party we use has a concept of both points and money. And both have unique value. Points give them reputation within the platform, lets them hop onto other private bounties, which can lead to future cash. But so for us, for duplicates, they get points, points only for duplicates. So they feel like at least got something for the time. It still builds their cred because they did find a legitimate issue. It's just, there's no longer any direct value to Indeed to pay it out twice, but at least we can kind of find that middle ground a little bit.
Yeah, the concept of points like through HackerOne or BugCrowd or other platforms are amazing. It's a great way to bridge those gaps. Also swag or even kudos. I mean, if you say, hey, thank you to so-and-so for this research, they can use that to help build out either their reputation or even resumes. We've actually had those requests before, and it's really cool to be able to support the community in that way.
To build on one of the points you mentioned earlier about how do you best engage with the researchers? It's very customer service oriented. It's the standard things you would think of in any kind of almost retail location. Setting expectations by having a clear bounty scope and what you pay out for, what you don't. But also when they give you a submission, communicate with them. It's like, hey, I think for a submission, we're a little backed up right now. We'll get to this in next time is one way to deal with if you've got too many issues coming in, or at least tell them what stage that submission is in. Are you still trying to reproduce, or have you already reproduced and now you're just trying to figure out how to fix it? Whatever place your ticket may be in, communicating with the researchers is one of the best ways to get them on your side, to make sure that they're still willing to work with you, because you got to see it from their perspective. They spent however many hours to find a bug and they submitted it to your program. If they don't hear anything for a few weeks, they're like, wow, this is terrible. They don't care about my issue, even if you care very much and may be actively working on it. The fact that you just haven't spent the 15 seconds to put a quick comment that, hey, we're taking a look at this, that can make all the world for the researcher.
I think Red said it, and he's said it many times, assume good intent. Most security researchers are coming to you because they want to work with you. If they wanted to do something else, they'd do something else. So they're there because they want to work with you, and assume that good intent, but also the clear communication, the clear acknowledgement, the setting of expectations. Hey, our queue right now is 2 weeks, maybe. We're going to pay in 10 days, maybe. In our case, we've sent this on to the vendor. We've heard back from the vendor, and the vendor has, X question, whatever it is. But also, a lot of researchers you see mature researchers and you see quite young people too. I get a lot of, hey, I want my CVE yesterday, right? And I have to explain, the report has to be vetted, the report has to be, and we work with the vendor, and when the vendor knows what the patch, and the CVE is assigned closer to the advisory timeline. So just taking the time to help the person understand the process. There are a lot of really talented young people out there who want to work with you, who may be new to the process. So even just taking the time to explain the process to them and what the timelines might look like really goes a tremendously long way.
So speaking of CVEs yesterday, Shannon, I know that you've worked through thousands of disclosures. Tell us a little bit about that experience. There's certainly going public with the vulnerabilities that have been found in your platform, program, your product can be kind of scary sometimes. What's your experience there?
So well, gosh, that gets into so many things. I'm struggling to know where to start. So at the Zero Day Initiative, because we're a research organization, but also because we are a white hat organization, we do consider our vendor partnerships very valuable. We come to the vendor and we say, you have 120 days to fix. And at the end of that 120 days, we'll disclose. Now, 0 day is never ever my first choice. My first choice is to partner, again, assume good intent. My first choice is to partner with the vendor to help them understand what's wrong, help them understand how they might fix it, why it's a vulnerability, how they might fix it, and then come to the point where we're doing coordinated disclosure together and we're agreeing about what the advisory should say. That's always my goal. But my experience with vendors is incredibly diverse. I work with some very mature vendors, Microsoft, Adobe, these are great long-term partnerships that we have with very mature P-certs and very mature sustaining processes. And so it's a very productive relationship, and we don't come to O-Day that often. Sometimes we plain disagree about the nature of a report, but in general, not. But then you do see many organizations who, I don't want to say less mature, but maybe less exposure to vulnerability disclosure process. Some SCADA organizations, that's less familiar to them. Some of the new IoT vendors, are seeing vulnerability disclosures for the first time. So you'd see a wide range of responses. I do my very best to help vendors understand, and this is where I think and I hope that I can help vendors with their processes if they want to talk about it. But I do see such a wide range of vendor responses, and I do try really hard to educate vendors about what it can look like and why it's not so scary. In terms of my education, I come from a comms background, so not professionally, but in terms of my university education. So, how you might respond to the O-Day, it's, we disagreed about the nature of the vulnerability because we believe that the attack surface is quite narrow, and DDI may say there is an attack surface, but the vendor may say it's quite narrow. But don't be afraid to say either this is why we disagree, or this is how we're going to mitigate, and this is when we can do it. And it doesn't have to be so scary or so threatening. And good research and well-intended persons, and I think most are going to be willing to have that conversation with you. And don't be afraid to pick up the phone. I think too often in software, we're too married to email. And, in software especially, we're too married to email, and we're having this whole conversation in email. Hey, can we get on the phone and talk about why we disagree? Or in my case, I have to go and tell a finder that I disagreed with the vendor, and I want to tell the finder at a high level what's going to happen next. But have those crucial conversations.
The one thing I might add to that, so from the, I guess from the Indeed side, one thing we try to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, you can't prevent them from publicly disclosing what they know, because it's something they know. They don't work for you technically, but there's a lot you can do prior to that to make sure that experience is good for both parties. If a researcher comes to us with a bug and we fix it quickly, and then they blog about it, Indeed can come out of that looking good, because we quickly acknowledged the severity of the issue and fixed it, and made sure that the researcher understood that every step of the way. So it can be a positive PR issue for public disclosure.
Working with security research can definitely be a positive. So
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
But yeah, I was just going to say that the kind of guidelines we tell our researchers is give us a chance to fix it, and then let us at least fact check whatever blog post you want to push out or whatever, and we're fine with that. I think at least our program is a little different than yours in that a lot of the people finding bugs in our platform, I almost want to say they're not in it for the reputation necessarily, at least not most of them in our experience, but you can get all sorts either way.
Actually, I have a question for you. I'm taking over your role. Sorry. So with that, have you found, is it because of the breaching of SLA sometimes? I mean, unfortunately, it can happen, or is it just this is the nature of the bug, and I want to talk about it regardless?
Like in cases where we take too long to fix it and they want to disclose anyway, sort of deal.
Yeah. What's the common reason why they prefer to talk about it publicly as opposed to keeping it to themselves?
So the basic premise of at least a money bounty is that you're kind of buying time in a sense. You give them incentive to bring the issues to you rather than trying to monetize in some other mechanism, and you can get pretty good value that way. But yeah, if you're taking too long to even acknowledge and pay out their issue, then yeah, they're going to try to find another route to use their finding. But if you're quick on at least acknowledging the issue and paying them, even if that's prior to the fix, we found the researchers give us a lot of leniency in how long it may take if a particular issue is complicated to fix, for example. We've just not seen researchers wanting to publish severe issues prior to us fixing it so far. We've been lucky in that regard, I suppose.
So if any of you found that disclosure or the ability to go public is part of the incentive for the researcher? I know at Microsoft, even I think later this afternoon, we've got multiple researchers that have participated, gone through the bug bounty program, received an award, and are now on stage at Black Hat or DEF CON or around the world sharing their findings. That's a big thing for them. Have you had that similar experience? Or was that part of your program?
I've actually, so when I was at the airline, we, as a company, not necessarily my personal opinion, adverse to public disclosure, especially the time frame that we launched the program. It was a matter of getting a lot of press really quickly. So we wanted to, and again, as the organization, wanted to minimize that. So the program didn't allow for public disclosure. Now, in my personal opinion, I think it's great. I think it can be great. But with that industry, there's a lot of speculation too. So it kind of blurs those lines. And it happens with any other organization. Anyways, you're going to have those blurred lines, or this is what I think this really means. In reality, the impact is a lot different. So we're trying to make sure we mitigated that. If I had my choice, though, at least kudos or something along those lines makes it a huge incentive for the researchers, the finders.
Yeah, when Indeed or a big airline says thanks publicly, it feels good.
Yeah, and there's been some really, I mean, I wish there were ones that I definitely think like, wow, this is one of the most unique things that I've ever seen. I wish you could talk about it, but that was just what legal signed off on. Sometimes that's what we're beholden to. Okay. So.
To return the favor, I've got a question for you.
Cool.
I don't know if that's still your stance, but you said your program just disallows public disclosure. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that's something you can enforce?
As best as possible. So we would use the payout as kind of that mutual understanding, like, hey, this is the way this was signed off on. If you disclose, sorry, but you can no longer be a part of the program, and we won't
they would
give
at least
you
be
miles.
Burning bridges. So
so that, I mean, honestly, that's not the ideal way to approach it, really, overall. I know some organizations are a lot more close-held, so I get that, but it can and does leave a bad taste in the mouth of some of the people doing this work. So, yeah.
The nature of it.
Yeah.
And Shannon, you got a comment?
So, when a finder accepts an award from Zero Day Initiative, he or she agrees to the researcher agreement, which does grant CDI exclusivity to the report. However, post-vendor patch, when a finder has come and asked, because we're a research organization ourselves, in practice, post-patch, when a researcher comes and says he or she would like to publish, we've never actually declined, and we do support that research post-vendor patch, and or post-ODA, vendor was given fair opportunity to do so. I do, and I'll ask what you think. My own sense, after many years sort of participating in the vulnerability and exploit economy, I do think if you're looking for a long-term non-disclosure, you may have to award a little bit more. That's my opinion. Tell me what you think, guys. Do you have an opinion?
It makes sense incentive-wise. If they're worried about losing future payouts, then that's an incentive to at least follow the rules of the program.
Yeah, I definitely see that we're swag-based programs. Yeah, it's a little bit like, oh, it's a shirt. Okay, whatever, that's fine. I'll go talk about it. I don't need a shirt. I have plenty. I go to conferences, something. But then when there's lots of points or miles or cash, Bitcoin, whatever on the line, and they're going to be a little bit more amenable to even the more stricter rule sets,
I think so.
good or bad, whatever. It just, money seems to talk.
Yeah, clearly there are differences of opinion across the industry and different ways of handling this issue. So it's really good to hear sort of 3 different perspectives on both how you've handled it in the past and how you think what a best practice might look like. And then Shannon, you mentioned the 120-day disclosure SLA, and I know there's a lot of variance, there's some variance across the industry about what's the right amount of time to ask for. How did you guys come across, briefly, I guess, how did 120 days come to be sort of your standard?
So you often see 90 days, which is indeed a pretty typical sustaining engineering cycle, right? And we've talked about, we've talked about 90 days. For us, how we came to 120, what if you miss your flight, right? You come in right at the end or right at the very beginning of a patch cycle. So we have we're pretty close working vendor relationships. But in truth, in my experience, most vendors are patching a little closer to that 90 days than that 120 days. And I certainly respect options in that range. If you are a finder and you're coming to vendors with these really short timelines, that's not always achievable. And we talked earlier about many finders, come from research. They don't come from that software, and they're less familiar with the sustaining cycle. This is something you really need to set expectations with your finders about, so they know what's reasonable in general and what's reasonable for you in particular. And again, the more specific you can be with setting scope and setting expectations, the better. So, criticality X, this is probably going to be we're looking at a time frame in this range. Criticality Y, we're looking at a time frame in this range. But the more you can set expectations, I think the better your and their experience is going to be, and the better your working relationship with the finder community is going to be.
So you mentioned scope. If you guys don't mind, it's a perfect transition to the next topic, which is scope. Now, you guys can't see the screen, but on the back, I've got a tweet from Ben, who's not at DEF CON, which has a picture of a staircase. There's a well-locked, secured gate with a box that says in scope, and there's a really easily climbable railing on the right that says out of scope. And this is certainly a commentary or complaint that's sometimes leveraged at the bounty industry and about setting scope. So have you guys dealt with an issue like this, or what's your perspective on this kind of poke at how bounties and scope work?
Go ahead, Shannon.
So I'm going to put on my research organization hat, the finder hat, and say it is so helpful to us when a vendor posts what's in scope, what meets the bar for security servicing for your organization. How do you treat end-of-life products? How do you treat extended support? How long are you going to service this thing? That's so helpful to us as a research organization. And a lot of finders are chasing CVEs as resume builders and reputation, and they don't want to look at what's not in scope for you. And then if they know what's in scope, that's going to eliminate some of those questions and some of that out of your queues that you don't want to look at. Please be really clear about what's important to you, what's in scope. Think in terms of how long are we going to service this product? What does extended support mean? What does end of life mean? What meets the bar? What meets the bar for security servicing for your organization? Share that with your finder community. Because they're going to come to you with what's important to you because they want credit for their work. And if it's not important to you, it's not in scope, they're not going to get that. So I really feel strongly you're going to eliminate a lot of stuff out of your queues just by sharing that information.
Your program is definitely going to live and die by the scope. First of all, know what your inventory is. That's going to save you. You won't always have 100%, but get in a pretty close idea. Do the best you can. And don't start off by throwing everything you have at it. That's a huge mistake. Unless you have a perfect program for your vulnerability management, good for you. I'd like to talk to you. But start small. Slow and steady wins the race, especially here. If you define your scope way too widely, you're going to be inundated, and that's not a fun thing to do. You could always build out more. You could change things. You're allowed to. It's your program, right? So start off, figure out what you want to have worked on, and just go from there. Any issue that you have in your process, it's going to be amplified. If you have a terrible communication problem, guess what? That's not going to be great for the researchers, for the developers, or for yourself. If this one group does an amazing job fixing everything that comes in before line, but then you add team 2 or B or whatever, and they're constantly pushing up bugs and they're the one you put into the program, you're not going to have a good day for that. So just understanding what you're getting into can make a big difference.
I would even say, sometimes when people talk about bug bounties, they're like, well, we don't know what's going to come and sort of everything's in scope. That is crazy. Don't do that. Really, because I think you're going to get a lot of, crazy cruff. I would look more at like piloting, targeted, targeted award program. This product's in scope. This type of bug's in scope. This is the award range, and starting with a subset of what you ultimately want, and not, hey, let's just see what happens, because you're going to attract, you're putting up an award, you're going to attract quite a lot potentially. Go ahead.
We have a little bit of almost a different experience, a little bit in scope. There's a few kind of almost tenets or rules of thumb we try to follow to guide our other actions. One of them being if we make a change because of some submission, then we should pay out for that. And then determining what's in scope, or if something is a valid submission, is it reproducible? Is there a valid attack scenario that can cause damage? And is there something we can do to fix it? But there are things that meet those rules of thumb that are outside of our explicit scope. And then what do we do in those cases? If we get a submission for a WordPress site that we operate, and the bug is in some WordPress plugin, but there's a fix we can do to mitigate right now. WordPress is technically not in scope, but maybe we should pay out on that. But then how do you communicate that to the finders, the researchers? And that's always a difficult thing that we found. Our current best effort way of trying to describe that is we've actually split off 2 bounties at this point. We've got our main bounty, which is our standard core products and things that are fairly mature and robust. And we've got a second private bounty that's basically the everything else bounty. It's got lower payout, different expectations.
Nice.
But that's at least the way we can treat different things differently.
Right.
Rather than just saying everything's in scope for this main bounty and dealing a $10,000 payout for something that may not have been that severe. Setting expectations and then that second bounty, I think, has at least worked better for us so far.
I like that.
Yeah, you definitely do not want to be the company that goes and gets a submission that's out of scope, and then you say it's out of scope, or definitely, or ignoring it. But if you fix it and it's still out of scope, and you say that and you don't give them anything, that's not a good way to have a relationship with the researchers. Like you were saying, if you touch it and fix it, it's not necessarily in scope, right? But it's something that you should at least compensate for and make it very clear too. Hey, thank you. This was an awesome submission. This was important to us. It's out of scope for the most part, or out of scope, but no, for the most part, just send us info. But this is just an exception for now. And then guide them back to what your scope is. They're not always going to do that, but I think if you're open and honest, it'll make a big difference.
That's great to hear. So we've got about 5 minutes left in the panel, so I want to give you guys a chance to give us some kind of key takeaways, some sound bites, anything that, like, really strong message you want to make sure people walk out of the room with today, or something we didn't get a chance to cover that you kind of feel strongly about, would like to share. So I want to give each of you like a minute or two just to kind of lay that out. Go ahead if you.
I can start.
Greg,
so I would say we have found a lot of value in our bug bounty program, and if you are considering one, I would strongly encourage you to do so. But start slowly, but do start. You can start points only, or even just like a Hall of Fame on a page somewhere, just so you can get all the mechanics of your bug bounty program worked out beforehand, and then as you've got your processes matured and you've got communication channels open with the engineering teams, you can start, cranking up the other perks or things to attract researchers. But start somewhere. But yeah, definitely start slow.
Yeah, start slow, plan methodically. You can start as slow as you want, but if you have a really bad website or a bad app, you're going to have a bad day no matter what, regardless of scoping or anything you do. I'm sorry. So know what you're getting yourself into. Pick that one site or application or whatever that you're working on that you want in scope. Make it the good team, that team that's really mature, that's fixing the bugs, has a really good solid pipeline, and work very, very closely with the engineers and developers. They're going to be your friends, and if they're not, they'll end up being your enemies, and that's the last group of people that you want mad at you, especially in a bug bounty program, let alone real life in general in security. But if you go, you work with them, and everything's calm and stable, awesome. Did you do a pen test before you launch? Do you actually have clean scans coming back? Are you, and I hate using the terms, but like shifting left, are you also making sure that their process for the actual code is working pretty well? One that's going to make your life easier in the program, but also you want to bring out your best first off. Otherwise, you're just going to have a lot of press, a lot of bad times, a lot of people angry at you angry at yourself. So definitely do yourself a favor. Slow and steady makes a huge difference.
I think the only thing that I didn't say already, and again, sort of researcher hat versus vendor hat, but from a researcher perspective, what we take into our bug bounty has taught us so much, right? And I think from a vendor perspective, what you take into your bug bounty will teach you so much about your products, will change how you test, will change how you look at your products. As software, or we tend to look from a user perspective. What is that user experience? We don't look through the attacker's eyes, and this I think will change you tremendously in that way for the better to strengthen your products.
I would say our team is a better security team because of our bug bounty program. We've learned so much from submissions we've gotten through our bug bounty program.
Great teacher.
Incredible to hear. Let's see, how are we doing on time, if I may? I can't quite see that. All right, 2 minutes. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We've heard a lot of different perspectives from various experiences launching multiple bounty programs, running Indeed's bounty program, and then especially Shannon from sitting outside vendors, but working with many over many years. It's great to see kind of, you can still distill some best practices, or at least know what questions you need to ask going in. Going forward in the future, just at the last minute, what do you think are going to be the biggest debates in this industry, or biggest issue areas, hot buttons, places we're going to see the most varied solutions to the same problem or question?
I think it being normalized is going to be the biggest thing.
That's still going to be something we're working on.
I still think right now it's still kind of like a niche community almost. I mean, we only have a couple of platforms, or a handful of platforms really. Sure. And the risk adverse nature of some of the Fortune 100s, but as they start rolling out and seeing that success, I think that's going to be the big game changer.
Is that the next couple of years, the next decade? What do you, if I'm just, you had to throw it out for?
I would say probably closer to 5 years. I mean, where it's been in the last 5 is pretty neat to see.
Yeah.
There's some brilliant things that people like Katie Masoros have talked about, what we need to do and change and adapt to make it a more holistic and inclusive. Right now, it's pretty pointed at certain groups of people who get high payouts, and it would be nice to see a larger community breadth and depth.
Yeah, I can definitely see the current crowd of researchers that submitting stuff to bug bounty programs becoming more mature and becoming, experts in their field, and I already see that with some of our researchers that have been working our bounty for a while. But yeah, another 5 years, they'd definitely be leaders in the industry for sure.
And collaboration. Don't be afraid to work with others to improve the greater ecosphere. That openness, everyone can benefit.
Thank you so much for your time today, panelists. It's been really great talking to you guys. And I'd like to welcome Kimberly back up, our moderator and MC here for the Bounty Micro Summit.
Sorry, I didn't realize there weren't stairs on both sides of the stage. All right, well, so remember when Jarek asked people to raise their hands if they run a bounty program? Could you do that for me one more time? We're gonna have a networking break, and you don't just have to talk to the folks on stage. You've got industry experts right here in the room. Let's have a great networking break, and then we're gonna be back for the third and final presentation in the Bug Bounty Micro Summit. Your program's been running for 4 to 6 months at minimum, and maybe you're out at the 1-year mark. How do you keep your program fresh? How do you keep it engaging and active and make sure you're still, beyond that first initial excitement of the launch? And also some of those disclosure things that we've been talking about, or when things go sideways, how do you handle incidents? We've got one of the strongest community managers in the security industry today, Chloe Brown from Bug Crowd, here to talk to us about gamification and incident management. So enjoy the break, and we'll see you back in a little bit.